I want you to picture something with me for a second.
All right, I'm picturing it.
You're in your car, right?
Yeah.
Driving home from a weekend trip.
Mm-hmm.
You're out in the country, just cruising past open fields, uh, cow pastures, maybe a farmhouse every mile or so.
Right, the real rural areas.
Yeah. But then you hit the outer ring. You start seeing those massive, sprawling subdivisions. You know, the huge lawns, two-car garages, the cul-de-sacs that just wind around forever.
Classic exurbs. You've got all this space, tons of privacy, but...
But you're a really long way from a gallon of milk.
Exactly.
But then you keep driving, and the lawns start to shrink, the houses get closer
Yeah,
together.
the density's picking up.
Right. Suddenly you're seeing townhouses, duplexes, then come the apartment blocks, 4 or 5 stories high, and finally you hit the city center, and it's just this canyon of glass and steel towering over you.
It's wild when you actually pay attention to it.
It feels like watching a time-lapse of civilization,
Right.
all in a 20-minute drive.
It really is a transition we've all seen 1,000 times, and it feels so organic, like a forest that just naturally gets denser as you get to the middle.
Right. It feels totally natural. But I was reading through the research we pulled for today's deep dive, and here is the kicker. There is absolutely nothing natural about it.
Not at all.
That shift from the farmhouse to the skyscraper isn't accidental.
Hmm.
It's not just some artistic preference by an architect. It is a highly calculated, mathematically driven code.
I think that's the perfect way to frame it. It's a code.
Yeah.
Because we tend to just navigate our cities without really thinking about the operating system running underneath them. But today, we are going to look at that source code.
We are unpacking the spatial dynamics of urban density and land use, which is based on topic 6.6 of the AP Human Geography curriculum.
Which I know it sounds a bit...
That sounds like the title of a lecture I definitely might have slipped through in college.
It does have a very academic ring to it, but the reality is so much more tangible than that. I mean, this is the logic that decides how long your commute is. It decides why your rent costs what it does. It even influences, who your neighbors are and where you buy your groceries.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to basically decode those invisible forces.
Yeah.
The economic, technological, and cultural forces that shape the physical footprint of where we live.
Let's do it.
We've got a whole stack of notes here based on these urban geography principles, and we're going to see if we can make sense of why our cities look the way they do.
And to really do that, we need to introduce the two main characters in this story. They are essentially the yin and yang of city planning, population density, and land use.
Okay, let's define those before we get into the heavy lifting. Because I feel like density is a word that gets thrown around a lot. You hear it at every city council meeting.
Oh, constantly. But strictly speaking, in the source material, population density is just the math. It's the people per square mile metric.
Basically, how many human beings are we packing onto a specific unit of dirt?
Simple as that.
And land use.
That's the what is actually happening on that dirt. Is it residential? Meaning, are people sleeping there? Is it commercial, where people are buying things?
Right.
Is it industrial, where people make things? Or is it institutional, like a school or a hospital?
And sitting above all of this, kind of blowing the whistle and handing out penalties, is zoning.
Yes. Zoning is the government's tool. It's the regulatory framework.
The rules of the game.
Exactly. The government draws lines on a map and says, okay, this block is for houses only, that block over there is for factories. But, and this is a really crucial distinction, in the text, zoning doesn't actually build the city.
It just sets the boundaries.
Right. The force that actually fills in those zones, the engine that drives how high the buildings go, is almost entirely economic.
Which brings us to the first big aha moment in the research for me.
Yeah.
There's a specific economic theory that explains why the tallest buildings are in the middle and the biggest lawns are on the edge.
Bid rent theory.
Yes, bid rent theory.
This is a fundamental concept in urban geography. Honestly, if you understand bid rent theory, you understand the basic anatomy of almost every single city on Earth.
Okay, so let's unpack it for everyone.
Yeah.
Bid rent. It sounds like an auction.
That's because it exactly is an auction. Imagine the city as a target, a giant bullseye.
Okay, got the bullseye in my head.
The very center of that bullseye is the CBD, the Central Business District.
The downtown core.
Right, the financial district, where all the banks, the corporate headquarters, and, the fancy steakhouses are.
Right, right.
Now, why are they there? Because in business, accessibility is money. If you are a major department store or a massive bank, you need to be accessible to the absolute maximum number of people.
You need to be where all the train lines meet.
Exactly. Where the highways converge, you need the center.
But the problem is, everyone wants the center.
Exactly. Supply is incredibly low because there's only one center. And demand is off the charts. So what happens? The price of that land skyrockets, becomes the most expensive dirt in the entire region.
So if I'm just a regular guy and I want to build a nice, sprawling, single-family ranch house right in the middle of Times Square.
I mean, you technically could, assuming zoning somehow allowed it, but it would be financial suicide.
Right.
You would be paying millions and millions of dollars just for the land. To make the math work on land that expensive, you have to generate a massive amount of revenue from that single plot.
And you can't do that with one family living there.
No way. You need 100 families paying rent or 10 businesses stacked on top of each other.
Wow. So the skyscraper isn't just about ego or trying to look cool. It's strictly economics. You build up because you literally can't afford to build out.
Precisely. Commercial interests, like offices and retail, they have the deepest pockets. So they win the bid for the center.
Hence, did rent theory.
You got it. That's why the CBD is almost always commercial. Residential use just gets pushed out to the next ring.
Okay, so let's get back in our car and drive away from the center. We leave the CBD. The land gets a little cheaper. Who moves in here?
This next ring is the zone of high residential density. Think of the inner city or the immediate urban rim.
Okay.
The land here is still too expensive for a big backyard, but it's affordable enough for high-rise apartments or large condo buildings.
And the people living here are making a very specific trade-off, right? Because going through this research, I feel like everything in this deep dive is just a series of trade-offs.
It really is all about trade-offs, and the trade-off here is space for access.
Right.
People living in this high-density zone are basically saying, I will live in a smaller box, maybe 800 square feet, in exchange for a 10-minute commute. Or being able to just walk down the street to the theater.
They're paying for the location, not the square footage.
Exactly. But then we keep driving. We get 5, 10, 15 miles out. We finally hit the periphery.
And this is where the bid-rent curve just kind of bottoms out.
Yes. The land out here is abundant and, relatively speaking, very cheap. And because the land is cheap, developers don't need to stack people vertically to make a profit. They can actually afford to sell you the land along with the house.
And that's where we get the low density, the classic American suburbs.
Yep. The single-family home, the private yard, the white picket fence. Here, you are trading access because now you have a long commute for space and privacy.
So really, the physical shape of the city, that cone shape where the buildings are super tall in the middle and totally flat at the edge, it's just a 3D graph of land values.
That is exactly what it is.
That makes so much sense. But we should dig a little deeper into what that density actually looks like on the ground. Because the source material breaks residential land use down into 3 specific tiers.
It does, and I think it's important to visualize them because they create completely different ways of living. It's not just a binary city versus country thing. There's a whole gradient.
Right. So tier 1 is high density. We touched on this. The towers.
Yes. High density is strictly about maximum land efficiency. You're finding this in the CBD and the major urban cores right next to it.
And the lifestyle here is really defined by shared resources, isn't it?
Completely. You share the elevator, you share the lobby, and crucially, you share transportation.
Because there's literally no room for cars.
Right. If you live in a 60-story building and everyone owns a car, you'd need a parking garage that's bigger than the actual building. So this lifestyle relies incredibly heavily on public transit, subways, buses, walking. You don't need a car because all the jobs and services are basically right downstairs.
Makes sense. Then we have tier 2, which is medium density. And this is the one I actually find really interesting because I feel like in a lot of North American cities, this is the missing middle.
It often is the missing middle, yeah. Medium density is your townhouses, your duplexes, maybe small 3-story apartment complexes.
You see this a lot in transitional neighborhoods, right?
Yeah, or older suburbs that were built before the car completely took over urban planning.
It's kind of the Goldilocks zone.
In a way, yeah. It balances that land efficiency with a bit more breathing room. You might have a small patch of grass, maybe a dedicated parking spot in an alley, but you're still close enough to your neighbors to support a walkable community.
Like you might walk to a local cafe on the corner, but you still drive to work.
Exactly. It's a hybrid lifestyle.
And finally, we have tier 3, low density, the absolute heavyweight champion of North American housing.
The single-family home on a large private lot, this is the dominant form in the suburbs and exurbs. And the priority here is incredibly clear. It's all about privacy and personal space.
But the source material points out a hidden cost here. And I think this is something most people never really think about. We usually assume the suburbs are cheaper because the house price per square foot might be lower than a downtown condo.
Right.
But there's a massive infrastructure trap.
Oh, this is a huge point for anyone who cares about how their tax dollars actually work. The text points out that low-density developments have astronomically high infrastructure costs per household.
Let's break that down. Why is it so much more expensive?
Well, think about the physical stuff that makes a modern house function. You need a paved road to get there. You need a water main, a sewer line, electrical grids.
Right.
In a high-density area, 1 mile of road and pipe might serve 1,000 families living in a few high-rises.
Got it. So you're splitting that maintenance cost 1,000 ways.
Exactly. But in a low-density suburb, that exact same mile of road and pipe might only serve 10 or 20 sprawling families.
Wow.
But the road still costs the exact same amount to pave. The pipe costs the same to lay. So the cost per person to maintain that infrastructure over time is massive.
That's wild. So the so-called privacy of the suburbs is actually extremely resource-intensive to maintain.
It is. It feels very private and independent, but it requires a massive continuous collective investment in asphalt and copper just to sustain it.
Okay, so we've covered the economics of it all, bid-rent theory,
Yeah.
and we've looked at the actual layout of the tiers.
Mm.
But cities aren't just math equations solved in a vacuum. They are built by people using tools.
Yeah.
So we need to talk about the invisible architects. The source material highlights technology and culture.
Let's start with technology, because tech really sets the boundaries of what is even physically possible for a city to do. Honestly, if you look at history, the map of any city is basically just a map of the available transportation technology at the time.
Because for thousands of years, the ultimate city limit was just how far can you walk?
Exactly. Ancient cities, medieval cities, they had to be super compact. They were human-scaled. If you couldn't walk to the market or your job in 20 minutes, the city just didn't work. That biological constraint kept density very high and the physical footprint very small.
But what broke that constraint?
The first really big shift the text mentions is the electric streetcar in the late 1800s. Suddenly you could live 3 or 4 miles out in these new streetcar suburbs and just commute in.
The city started to stretch out.
Yeah, it started looking like a starfish, just reaching out along the rail lines.
But the real explosion, the thing that gave us the modern map we all know today, was obviously the automobile.
The internal combustion engine changed literally everything. Once cars became affordable and the interstate highway system was built, distance became completely trivial.
Right.
You could live 20, 30, even 40 miles away and still work downtown. And that is what allowed the city to sprawl outward into the low-density exurbs we see today.
So the car allowed us to go out, but technology also allowed us to go up.
Oh, yes. We totally take skyscrapers for granted now. But before the late 19th century, they were physically impossible to build.
Because of the bricks, right?
Yeah, masonry. You hit a limit around 5 or 6 stories, any taller than that, and the stone or brick walls had to be so thick at the bottom just to hold all the weight that you literally had no room for windows or doors on the ground floor.
And I guess nobody wanted to walk up 10 flights of stairs every day anyway.
Exactly. So we needed 2 massive inventions to fix this.
Steel frame construction and the safety elevator.
Yes. Steel frames took the weight off the exterior walls, and the elevator made the height accessible. Without those 2 things, bid-rent theory just hits a physical ceiling. You couldn't densify the core no matter how much money companies were willing to pay for the land.
So technology provides the tools. It gives us the elevator and the car.
Mm-hmm.
But, and here's where the deep dive gets a bit heavier, technology doesn't actually decide who lives where.
No, it doesn't.
That is decided by history, culture, and specific policies.
This is a layer of the research we absolutely cannot ignore. The sources are very clear that the spatial arrangement of an American city isn't just about money or tech, it's also deeply about social stratification.
The text mentions a concept called socioeconomic reflection. What does that actually mean in plain English?
It basically means the physical landscape acts like a mirror for society's class structure.
Okay.
Historically, the working class lived right near the center, near the factories, the noise, the pollution, mostly because they couldn't afford the time or money to commute, while the wealthy moved out to the periphery for clean air and open space.
So the suburbs really started out as a major status symbol.
They did, But in the United States specifically, during the mid-20th century, this wasn't just about class. It was intensely compounded by racial policies. And the source material spends quite a bit of time on the phenomenon known as white flight.
This was mostly happening in the 1950s and 60s, right?
Correct. As those suburbs expanded, thanks to the car, there was a mass relocation of white populations from the urban centers out to these brand new low-density developments. But the sources emphasize that we can't just look at this as a matter of personal preference.
Right.
It was enforced by actual legal and systemic tools.
Yeah, one of the terms that came up in the research was restrictive covenants. These were actual legal documents.
Yes, they were clauses attached directly to the deeds of the houses, and these covenants effectively banned the sale or rental of that property to specific racial or ethnic groups.
Wow.
So you had a situation where these new sprawling suburbs, which were rapidly building generational wealth for their owners, were legally gated off from people of color.
Meanwhile, the high-density urban centers basically became the only option for those excluded groups.
Exactly. So what happened is you ended up with a map where the high-density core was largely minority and lower income, and the low-density outer ring was predominantly white and middle class.
And even though those covenants are completely illegal now, and have been for decades, the text makes a point to note that the spatial footprint remains.
The map has a long memory.
It really does. We still see the scars of those historical policies in the demographics of our cities today. The sources point out that the segregation established by those policies created wealth gaps and neighborhood divides that persist long after the laws themselves were struck down.
Absolutely. It's a very powerful reminder that when we look at a skyline or a subdivision, we aren't just looking at buildings. We're looking at history, basically frozen in concrete.
It's intense.
Mm.
But trying to look forward, the encouraging thing the text notes is that cities are not static.
Right.
They are always evolving. And right now, we are actually seeing a shift in the other direction. We are in a brand new cycle of development.
Yes. For a good 50 years, the trend was just sprawl, sprawl, sprawl. Just keep building further and further out. But now, urban planners are heavily focused on something called infilling.
Infilling, which is essentially the exact opposite of sprawl.
Exactly. Instead of taking a farm 20 miles away and paving it into a subdivision, you look for the gaps inside the existing city.
You find the vacant lot or the abandoned warehouse.
Or the massively underused parking lot,
Right.
and you build there instead.
You fill in the holes.
You fill in the holes. The entire goal is to increase density within the existing footprint. And it makes perfect economic sense because all that infrastructure, the roads, the water pipes we talked about earlier.
It's all already there.
Exactly. You don't have to build a brand new 10-mile highway just to reach it.
Now, the research highlights Seattle as a really strong case study for this infilling concept. Why Seattle specifically?
Seattle's kind of a perfect storm for this. You had a massive economic boom with the tech sector, right? Amazon, Microsoft, all of them bringing in tens of thousands of highly paid workers.
So the demand for housing goes completely through the roof.
Off the charts. But Seattle is geographically trapped. You have the Puget Sound on one side and you have mountains on the other. You literally cannot just sprawl endlessly outward.
So bid rent theory kicks in super hard. Extremely limited land, incredible demand.
Yes. The pressure on the center became immense, so the city had to adapt. And they did that by updating their zoning regulations to allow for upzoning.
Meaning they allowed taller, higher density buildings in neighborhoods that used to be strictly single-family or low-density commercial.
Exactly. They basically made the decision to grow up and in, rather than trying to push out.
And this ties right back to the sustainability argument that the text wraps up with. Infilling is generally much, much better for the environment.
It is, and it mostly comes back to the cars.
Right.
High-density areas can actually support robust public transit. If you put 500 people in a new apartment complex right near a light rail station, a huge chunk of them will just take the train to work.
But if you put those exact same 500 people in a new subdivision 20 miles outside the city limit.
That is 500 more cars idling on the highway every single morning.
So density isn't just about saving physical space on a map. It's really about saving energy and reducing emissions.
It's all about efficiency. The city is essentially trying to correct the massive inefficiencies of the sprawl era.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second and look at the whole picture we've painted today.
Right.
We started with that drive into the city.
Right. We saw that the layout, tall buildings in the middle, flat on the edges, is driven by the economic engine of bin rent theory. Commercial interests take the center, residential takes the rings.
Then we saw how technology, specifically the elevator and the car, made that physical layout possible in the first place.
And then we saw how history and culture, including the really painful history of segregation and white flight, decided exactly who lived in which ring.
And finally, we're seeing the current reaction, infilling, where cities are desperately trying to densify the core to become more sustainable.
It really connects all the dots. The city isn't just a random collection of buildings, it's a physical manifestation of all these competing forces: money, tech, history, and policy.
It is definitely going to change how I look at my morning commute. I mean, next time you're stuck in traffic, just staring at a row of townhomes or craning your neck to see the top of a new bank tower downtown, just remember, none of this is accidental. You are looking at a physical map of our economic and social priorities.
And honestly, that raises a really important question for you to take away from all this. In America, we so often default to this specific American dream ideal: the big yard, the quiet street, the low-density life.
It's what we're constantly told we should want.
Right. But when you look at the hidden infrastructure costs we talked about, and you look at the severe environmental impact of a completely car-dependent society, we really have to ask ourselves, is that dream actually sustainable?
That is the big question. As our population keeps growing, can we afford, financially and ecologically, to just keep living horizontally? Or is the future of a functional society inevitably going to be found in that medium ground, or even the high-rise?
It really challenges our standard definition of a good life. But as the cities grow, it's a question we're going to have to answer pretty soon.
Definitely something to chew on while you're out there mowing that big lawn or, waiting for the elevator.
Exactly.
Thanks for diving in with us today.
Keep questioning the map.
See you next time on The Deep Dive.